Now this brings us to the next agenda, which is our panel discussion. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, please allow me to provide a brief introduction to you on our two panelists. Mr. Gurdip Singh Sidhu has over 24 years of experience in financial services and management consulting and has been with CIMB Group for over 15 years. He currently helms two functions within the organization, Group Human Resources and Group Sustainability. As Group Chief People Officer, he is responsible for setting the human capital direction and strategy of the group, in alignment with the group's overall strategy and priorities. Meanwhile, in his role as Group Chief Sustainability Officer, Mr. Gurdip leads the development and execution of CIMB's sustainability strategies. Next, we have Mr. Ong Pang Yen, who is currently Sunway Group's Executive Director in the Chairman's Office, overseeing group brand marketing and communications, the group's sustainability and ESG agenda, as well as the Jeffrey Chia Foundation, the largest education-focused social enterprise in Malaysia. Mr. Ong served with Malaysia's Public Works Department for 8 years before joining the Sunway Group as resident engineer in 1993. He was actively involved in Sunway Group's pioneering overseas investment projects across Cambodia, Zimbabwe, South Africa, Australia, India, and China. With that, ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure to invite Datuk Umar, CEO of Bursa Malaysia, Mr. Gurdip Singh Sidhu of CIMB Group, and Mr. Ong Pang Yen of Sunway Group to come up to the stage for the sharing session, which I am sure we are all looking forward to. Gentlemen, dipersilakan mengambil tempat duduk. Now, we'll begin with each panelist giving a 15 minutes presentation. We'll first get to understand better the sustainability journey and aspirations of CIMB, followed by that of Sunway Group. We'll then follow with a Q&A session, which is to be facilitated by Datuk Umar as our moderator for the day. Datuk Umar, over to you.
Thank you, Israel, and a very warm welcome, everyone. And as we say when we have listings, welcome to the exchange, and a very good afternoon. Firstly, Mr. Ong, Gurdip, thank you for joining us today. I am mindful of the time, so the floor is yours, sir.
Oh, okay. Okay, I think I'm going first. So, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Umar and the Bursa team for having us as part of this important milestone. So I thought what I'll do maybe for the next 10 minutes or so, give a little bit of perspective on what we have been up to and the journey that we've been on, and then happy to sort of go deeper into different topics. This sort of, gives you a bit of a feel of the journey. It's actually quite a relatively short, if you like, journey, in the sense that, really in 2018, we looked at sustainability, or started to look at sustainability in a much more structured, comprehensive, and strategic approach. Then, we went through a series of things, and you can see a fair bit of acceleration really in 2020 and 21. So a few takeaways from this is, and I picked up a few points in Julian's intro as well in the guidebook. The sustainability conversation for us, and I'm sure for many of you, has moved up to be a strategic conversation and a strategic inclusion, if you like, into everything we do. Second takeaway, I guess, from our experience is we definitely don't know a lot of things, and we continue to not know a lot of things. But one way to bridge that gap is to align, to be part of conversations, to be part of global organizations and groupings, and that helped us accelerate things. And third is perhaps have a sense of how do you track your own progress, right? So we chose to sort of track against the Dow Jones Sustainability Index or the S&P Sustainability Framework, so that, as you can see on the right side, we started off at the 19th percentile, so 19th means from the bottom 19th, and we're pleased that in the last report that came out late last year, we moved up to the 79th percentile globally, and that sort of, is well in line with the aspirations that we had set. So just those three things I thought useful to share from sort of our experience in it. Why sustainability? I think, another thing that I picked up recently is, we should never think that we are over communicating and over discussing sustainability, because however much people in this room may feel like, we're talking a lot about sustainability, the reality is, most of our organizations are still at a very early stage in being exposed to sustainability. So we always remind ourselves, we remind our people on why are we on this journey, right? Why are we on this journey? And the starting point is, as cliche as it may sound, it's simply the right thing to do, right? And on the second, and maybe the most important sort of dimension, is what does it do for the business? And I think, I'm sure you will hear this from many others as well. It does actually protect your business, right? It does protect. It's in a way future-proofing I'm sure all of us have heard the term future-proofing when we talk about technology, digitization, and all of that. But if you look at the sustainability umbrella, it is really a good way of thinking about how you future-proof your enterprise. And of course, related to that is there's new business opportunities, right? And I'll talk about that from a banking lens shortly. The third pillar is the influence, and this is very important because later, I'll also share that as a bank, we have 33,000 people spread over, largely 5 or 6 core ASEAN countries. Long and short, what we do from our footprint will only move the dial in a very, very small way. But we, as a financier, we are essentially an intermediary, right? And many of you here, I hope, are clients of CIMB. And if not, hopefully we can serve you one day. But long and short, it is what we do with our clients that is really going to make the difference and define our contribution from a sustainability perspective. And that has so much more that we need to do. And then finally, stakeholders, right? And this is interesting because I also wear the HR hat. And, one thing I realized, and I'm sure again it's intuitive, that there's a disproportionate interest in sustainability among the younger people. There's a disproportionate, right? So we have a very small sustainability team, but the number of people I interview for our, graduate management program or our scholarship programs, it's a much higher ratio of people who are interested to come back and work in sustainability or do something in sustainability, and that's great. So I think, if nothing else, it's also a cool and interesting way to attract talent to want to work for you. This is how we kind of structure our thinking, right? So we do sustainability for ourselves, which is the first pillar, the group. The second pillar, which is where really the outsize impact comes from, which is with our clients. Then we have the sort of more classical corporate responsibility pillar on society. And then cutting across all of that is, we put the governance and risk lens in terms of what needs to be done. And lastly, of course, the stakeholder engagement and advocacy, which I kind of mentioned earlier, is really something that in this space, more so than others, we really need to latch on and work on. In terms of then, how does that get translated to the work we do, especially, with clients? There's a general principle of wanting to reduce footprint and wanting to increase handprint, right? And so this cuts across, our suppliers and everything we source. It cuts across our own operations and what we are doing towards our sort of net zero path. And then, of course, very importantly, the products and services that we come up with, which, if we have time, we are happy to go through. But just to give you maybe 1 or 2 examples, that is already very actively rolled out and being utilized today. We have something called sustainability-linked loans, right? So we give you a loan as a corporate, in addition to the interest rates, which we always, I assume, negotiate very hard to get the best rate for clients. We also can put sustainability-linked targets to it. So if the corporate meets those targets, then there's an interest rebate. So the cost of borrowing drops. So those are small ways to, add the carrot, if you like, so that clients likewise incentivized to go through that journey. This is a summary of our headline commitments. So again, fairly intuitive. We've got a climate focus, and here it is all about hitting net zero, scope 1 and 2, which is really our own operations by 2030, and net zero holistically by 2050. And that is actually a huge effort and challenge. And the reason for that is that, just to put into perspective, the scope 3, which is what we need to do to get to 2050 net zero, is 700x what scope 1 and 2 means for us, right? So what that means is, we have to put a lot of effort to get to net zero for ourselves, but that's nothing, because if we can get to scope 3 net zero, which is what we do with all our clients and our portfolio overall, that is 700 times larger than our own footprint. And then on the middle pillar, of course, this is sometimes the one that gets talked about more. What are we doing to reduce harm, right? So we came out publicly and said we would exit coal by 2040. We are working on a pathway towards that in a very structured way, and that involves, working with various stakeholders and clients that we have. And then under the maximizing positive impact, we committed to raising 30 billion or mobilizing 30 million towards sustainable finance by up to 2024, right, cumulatively. And so pleased to share that, that's moving actually very well. And so I think we are north of 20 billion already, and that's fantastic. And of course, the social impact in terms of commitment on corporate responsibility at 150 million cumulatively, and also 100,000 hours annually for our employees. There's a lot, obviously, with Bursa doing the PLC guide. There's a lot, obviously, conversation around governance. So just to very briefly share that in our case, these are the levels that sustainability is embedded. I think maybe one or two things I'll call out as opposed to going through everything. More recently, at the end of last year, we put in place a group sustainability and governance committee. So this is a subcommittee of the board, and they meet regularly to spend more focused time and provide steer to management on our sustainability efforts. So that has really upped that, if you like, time and involvement of the board. And then at the management level, of course, we have, the committee at sustainability level, we have a transformation council, and of course the team within sustainability. There's also, of course, interest in how we look at it from a risk perspective. So I think, just like for those who have been involved in, different industries or financial services, you would have remembered that, there's many new risk disciplines that have come up over the years, right? Over 30 years, 20 years ago, probably no one really talked about operational risk, reputation risk, and all of that. And so now, of course, sustainability risk is the big new inclusion. So we look at it again from different lenses of economic, environmental, and social, and then that feeds into a policy document and guide that we have, which is what we refer to as the group sustainability policy and the group sustainable financing policy. So that really guides what we do in terms of things like our approval process, for example, for credit. So now credit includes a sustainability filter and lens. So all credit approvals has that incorporated in there, and that goes through the regular process. The last couple of points, I mentioned at the beginning that that whole advocacy, that whole partnership and alliances is really key. And we decided to do that very early on in tying up with, for example, UNIP FI and signing up for the Principles of Responsible Banking. And you can see a few other groups. And of course, we work well with Datuk Umar on the CEO Action Network here and actively with the regulators where Bursa, the team from Bursa are very actively involved in the JC3 as well, right? So that's it. So maybe in closing, I'll just do a 10-second advertisement on our upcoming conference, the Cooler Earth, which maybe some of you all would have heard of in the last couple of years. We had to do it very sort of, virtual, the last one. So hopefully this time we're getting back into a hybrid of physical and virtual. So hope to see many of you there, and hope to work with all of you in this collective effort towards a more sustainable and just world. Thank you.
Thank you, Gurdip. There's a lot to take in. Fear not, we'll have question time shortly. A whistle-stop visit to the way CIMB is doing things. Mr. Ong.
Yeah. Can you hear me? Thank you, Datuk, and congratulations for the launch of the PLCT Book 2. Thank you for Gurdip for sharing a very comprehensively what ESG is all about. As you have heard, I am put in charge of the group brand and marketing and communication. So I would like to ask for your indulgence, your forbearance for us to play one video, which is related to what I'm going to say, if we may.
The world is changing. Natural resources are depleting. World population is growing. Inequality is widening. Building a sustainable future is now one of the most pressing challenges of our time. But where others dithered, we forged ahead. Where others doubted, we embraced. At Sunway, sustainability has been part of our corporate DNA since our very inception. More than 4 decades ago, we transformed a wasteland into a thriving wonderland, bringing joy and laughter while exploring ideas and innovating solutions for a better tomorrow. We are an archetype of smart, sustainable developments in this part of the region. The goal? To build a sustainable future where everyone can thrive and prosper. Since the United Nations adopted the 17 Sustainable Development Goals in 2015, Sunway has embraced them with a mission to improve lives and create opportunities for all. We raised the bar and established 5 goals, driving real sustainable change. Every level of detail and every walk of life is taken into consideration to ensure a thorough, holistic development. Sunway City, Kuala Lumpur is a wasteland turned wonderland success story. As an exemplar of a smart, sustainable city and one of the region's model low-carbon cities, it has become a blueprint for our Sunway townships nationwide. We answer the urgent call for action on planetary health to enhance the quality of life across our cities and people, ultimately contributing to nation building. From designing and developing green buildings to bridging townships with integrated mobility through transit-oriented developments, we are making our cities faster, smarter, and greener. The goal is to bring us all closer to live, learn, work, and play in a safe, comfortable, and sustainable environment. Here in Sunway City, Kuala Lumpur, it's a living laboratory where researchers and innovators strive to generate sustainable, real-world solutions for future urban spaces towards the betterment of our environment and humankind. With 2 lakes within the city, we have built our own water treatment plant, providing uninterrupted water supply for every home, office, and business operator, delivering stronger water security for our smart, sustainable city. Renewable energy ensures cleaner air for our communities. Residents and communities receive aid through our CSR programs, where they get to enjoy fresh, organic, and pesticide-free produce from our state-of-the-art urban farms at repurposed and underutilized building spaces. Our supply chain is designed to ensure a seamless, sustainable operation, which allows us to focus on what matters most, our community. We continuously encourage our vendors to adopt sustainable practices, making them an integral part of our journey towards a sustainable future. Guiding them with our comprehensive sustainable procurement policy, we work with vendors to minimize their environmental footprints and build their capacity to meet the gold standard in a host of important issues, such as human rights, business ethics, and occupational safety. Our people, our strength, they form the backbone of our organization. With more than 16,000 personnel delivering excellence every day, we prioritize the health, safety, and well-being of every staff, from our frontline workers and back-end employees to on-ground staff and senior leaders. We provide our people with a fulfilling work environment and emphasize a culture with strong occupational health, safety, and environment. We prioritize compliance with international health and safety standards to create a conducive and thriving work environment. providing our people with access education, engendering a culture of continuous and lifelong learning through development programs. This provides opportunities for growth, realize ambitions, and shape the leaders of tomorrow. Since our inception, giving back to communities has always been in our DNA, a lifelong principle of our founder and chairman, Tan Sri Dr. Jeffrey Chia. We will always be there for the underserved, to uplift and empower the vulnerable, providing them a hand up and never a hand out. Education opens doors to a better life, and the opportunity for education should be equal. We are committed to nation building by providing deserving students access to quality education through the Jeffrey Chia Foundation, Malaysia's largest education-focused social enterprise. We are cultivating future generations through Sunway University and the Jeffrey Sachs Center's commitments to lead Mission 4.7, a global initiative to accelerate the implementation of education for sustainable development worldwide. And alongside the newly launched Sunway Center for Planetary Health, we aim to break down the silos between health, crises, and economy, and to issue and support an urgent, clear, and simple call for action on planetary health. As we shape our future leaders, we ensure that integrity, the most important of values that has made us who we are today, is embedded in every employee. Our zero tolerance for any forms of unethical practices defines us. It's not just about doing the right thing, but doing the right things right. Our work across the board is dedicated to you. It gives us a great sense of pride when we are recognized for our efforts. By living our 5 sustainable goals and aiming to achieve them by 2030, we hope to inspire everyone to build a sustainable future, because our future is in our hands.
All right, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to share. Let's put on the slides. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I'm here. I'm given the task to share Sunway's journey in net zero, to achieve net zero by 2050. Now, I mean, just as Gurdip has said, things are unsustainable if they cannot be maintained indefinitely. So one of the things that cannot be sustainable if we still continue business as usual is our planet. All right. Now, our planet actually can absorb about 18 billion tons of CO2 annually through its forests, its oceans, and the soil on the land, about 18 billion tons naturally. But the industrialized world is emitting close to 40 billion tons every year. So we have about 22 surplus CO2 out there that is not absorbed. All right, and this accumulation of CO2 over the years results in global warming. Now, scientists have told us under the IPCC report that the planet can at most handle another 400 billion tons, after which it will reach its tipping point, the 1.2, the 2 degrees increase in temperature, global temperature, and that would have a chain reaction. Of course, ice, glaciers will melt. This permafrost, frozen land will also melt. And when frozen land melt, a lot of all those biological things in the land will decay and it emits more CO2. So it creates a chain reaction. That's why it is called reaching the tipping point. So if we have 22 billion surplus that is not absorbed, and the world can only handle another 400. You can do the maths. We have less than 20 years before we reach the tipping point. That's why it is very urgent. The Secretary General says it's code red for humanity. And the urgent call, even from the days of the Paris Climate Change Agreement, which Malaysia is a signatory, has called for us to halve our emission, or specifically 45% reduction by 2030 based on 2010 baseline year. All right, so you have 20 years to reduce your emission by 45%, just to save the planet. What it meant actually is that, back in 2010, if to produce 1 ton of cement, you emit 1,000 kilogram of CO2, because of the process of burning and firing to get the cement. By 2030, 20 years later, you should have improved your process so much that you only emit 550 tons. So you are reducing it by 45%. That's essentially what it meant. Okay, so how the Sunway reacts to this? Of course, as a good corporate citizen, if the government says the country is going to reduce by 45%, we have to do it together. Otherwise, how is the country going to achieve that target? So as a good corporate citizen, we adopt that as well. Of course, we are very aware of the urgent situation that we are facing as far as planet Earth is concerned. So to understand what net zero is all about, maybe we look at this chart. This chart is produced by the government. It's reported to the UNFCCC. You know, every 2 years we produce a report and send it to UNFCCC, the government that is. So if you look at this chart, what is above that zero line is the nation's emission, CO2 or GHG emission, above that line. And below that line is what the country can absorb through its forest, its soil, its land. So you will see the red line there, and you see the red line crossing to the top in 2005. That means Malaysia has always emit less than what the forest can absorb until after 2005. After 2005, we became net emitter, all right, and progressively a net emitter of CO2. The big orange part actually belongs to the energy sector. All right, so about 75% of the CO2 emitted by the nation comes from the energy sector. Energy sector is defined as TNB, the production of electricity, a coal-fired plant, for example, and all the transportation that is on the road, you know, the cars, the trains, and all those things that are burning fuel to be powered and to be moved. And the net, okay, total emission minus total absorption is about 75 billion tons back in 2016 for the country, just 75 billion tons. 75 billion tons is about 30% of the emission by the energy sector. So if all of us were to reduce our energy consumption, our traveling by about 30%, then the country can be net zero quite easily. And therefore, you can see the government policy today is to make our energy grid, the TNB energy grid, greener by renewable energy. The government has set 31% of it to be green by 2025, for example. That's 31%. That's about right, you know. And then the government is promoting electric vehicles, for example. That's also about right. So you can see that we are moving towards achieving the net zero commitment as a nation. But as a nation, we have forests. More than 50% of our land is covered by forests, so it can absorb a lot of CO2. We can try to plant a lot of trees, but if you look at the figures there, we have planted about 55,000 trees, but it only absorbs about 1,100, is it, tons of carbon, way short of what we are emitting. So planting trees is, I mean, preserving our forests is very important, but planting trees as a neutralization of emission, of companies' emission is not really an answer, you know, as far as a corporate like Sunway is concerned. So just to have put it in context, the world pre-pandemic emits about 36 billion tons. Malaysia about 330 million tons back in 2016. So that's about, I can't see, it's how many percent? It's a small percentage, right, of total emission. And then Sunway, you know, about 200,000 tons. So we measure all these figures just to give a context where we stand. Even though insignificant, I think put together, if we all come to do this together, it will have a very significant effect. So how do we try to achieve net zero by 2050? 2050 is a long way off. Everybody can commit, but you need to have a plan, you know, 2050. So we have an interim KPI, milestone. The same, you know, we just keep to what the IPCC and Paris Climate Change Agreement has proposed. By 2030, we want to be able to halve our emission intensity, because the population grow. Of course, there will be more emission, but the intensity of the emission should be reduced by 45%. And we hope to achieve this through better operational efficiency. All right, change old chillers to new chillers, adopt new methods, innovate, you know, just as the example I gave about cement. So we need to do that. And then the second thing that we want to do is to try to avoid and to substitute the dirty energy with the cleaner energy, all right? So solar PV cells, you can see from the video, we are installing a lot of solar PV cells. That is to substitute the dirtier energy with the cleaner energy. You can see if we are using TNB energy, the conversion factor is about 0.6. If you use solar PV cells, the conversion, from megawatt hour to CO2 emission is just 0.04. Now, even so, after making your improving and reducing emission to a minimum possible level, you still have a problem. It is still not net zero. You still have CO2 emission. And therefore, you need to deal with carbon offsets, all right? Carbon offsets. For us, carbon offsets would really have to be carbon capture and storage. Because even scientists say reduction alone won't be able to help us achieve net zero by 2050 on the global scale. You need carbon capture and storage. But carbon capture and storage industry in this region is not really matured, it's not really viable as yet. I will give you and explain why that is the case. So for Sunway, between now and 2030, unless things change dramatically, our focus is on minimizing our residual emission through operational efficiency and substitution of dirty energy with clean energy. Now, how do we achieve this target of minimizing residual emission? So we have adopted what is known as internal carbon pricing. I think most of you might have heard about it. So we put a price on carbon emission, all right? Currently, for this year, we are adopting just 15 ringgit per ton. 15 ringgit per ton is like 5 Singh per ton. Singapore has carbon tax, and it is 5 Singh per ton. So we are adopting 15 ringgit per ton. But there's a danger in underpricing carbon. I must qualify that, all right? Because if you price carbon too low, there are consequences. I will come to that as well later. So we put 15 ringgit per ton. And then we agree with all our business units, we have 13 business division, that, we fix what is the permissible emission for their production, all right? If it is office, if it is maintenance of office, we will say what is the permissible building energy intensity per square meter, So if you, we will take benchmarks from BCA, Singapore BCA, for example. They have data on energy intensity for various types of buildings, hospital, education institution, office, and so on. So we will take those as the data, and then we target lower than what is achievable at the current moment. All right, Malaysia GBI as well has got those recommended data. If you want to be platinum, if you want to be gold, they have recommended data. So let's say we do not have any data. I think that would be the question. Then if you look at what IPCC has recommended, which is 45% reduction over 20 years, it comes to about 3.3% annually reduction. 3.3% reduction annually will give you a 45% reduction over 20 years. So you can also adopt that as a guide if you do not have any benchmark figures. Benchmark figures, are supposed to be developed by SBTI. If you have heard about SBTI, Science-Based Target Initiative, they are supposed to develop benchmark targets for industries. But unfortunately, it's a very complicated thing. Many of their works are still a work in progress. So we do not really have. So we have to develop our very own. We use our past data, and then we say you have to reduce by 3 to 4% every year. All right. So that is how we establish that baseline with our business unit. So if at the end of the year, they exceeded what is agreed by 1,000 ton, then 1,000 multiplied by 15 ringgit, we will deduct 15,000 from their bonus pool. All right, so there's a price. Okay, we deduct 15. That's the recommendation of Bursa and the Security Commission, isn't it? That you have to fix all these KPIs to a remuneration package. But I think it is very good because it raised a lot of awareness and consciousness. Internal carbon pricing basically gives us 3 advantages. Number one, it prepares companies that adopt internal carbon pricing to be better prepared for regulatory changes. You never know, the government may soon, under so much pressure, international community may be asking the government, what have you done, to help reduce carbon emission? And they may have to show that, yes, we are going to implement carbon tax, or the easier one to do is the cap and trade emission trading scheme. And this is putting a price on carbon. So if you are better prepared in minimizing your carbon emission, you will be more competitive when all these things come about. Of course, secondly, if you are doing trading with international partners, their standards may be far ahead of more advanced than ours. So you have to be prepared, because they may not buy from you if you do not comply to certain carbon emission requirement. From the S side, we have already seen some of the Malaysian goods being seized by customs. So we know if you are in international trading, be aware that carbon pricing will come not too far in the future. Of course, the closest at home is that when you have pricing, when your bonus gets shrunk, you will remember to switch off the lights when you go, and switch off the air cons when you leave office. Little things like that, and you will try to innovate how to do things more efficiently and better. So these are the advantages of putting in the internal carbon pricing mechanism. So just some nice photograph to show you that it's not talk, it is actually putting things into action. I think all this is a lot to do with scope 3 as well. Elevated walkway, how it reduces the carbon footprint of the entire city. Water treatment, in the past, people talk about globalization, but I think today it's more localization. You need to, grow your own food as well. The pandemic has taught us that, if you rely on Cameron Highlands for your vegetable, you'll probably go hungry. So for a sustainable city, food security is very important. That's why Sunway City is the first in the country to be accredited Green Integrated Township by GBI since 2012. And just last year, the Ministry of Environment also awarded and recognized Sunway City as a low carbon city for having continuously and successfully reducing its emission over the years. Just one last point before I conclude. Just to introduce the concept of planetary health, all right? I think you saw in the video about planetary health. Humanity can only thrive if our planet is hospitable to us, and there's a limit to it. Because we keep disturbing the planet, it will hit back. As we have seen, the pandemic is caused by zoonotic diseases. The disease jump from the animal to us, because if you keep disturbing them, they will disturb you back. And then if you keep polluting them, microplastic in food, you talk about microplastic in food, these are the consequences that we will have to bear if we are not careful. So Sunway is also very much involved in planetary health. I forgot to say about carbon tax, if I may. I'll just finish this. Why there's a danger in underpricing carbon? We are very conscious about this, and so we have to qualify. To capture and store carbon, the estimate is that it costs about $50 to $60 per ton. That is if you capture it from a coal-fired plant, very concentrated, very easy to capture. If it is not so easy to capture, it can be $80, $90 per ton. Now, which company will pay that kind of money to have their carbon sequestrated or stored underground? You just let it go. Unless you have a tax regime that is practiced by the Scandinavian countries. In the Scandinavian countries, I think some of them have got carbon tax in excess of $100 per ton. In fact, IPCC recommended it should be about $130 per ton by 2030. So if you have a tax regime like that, then carbon capture and storage industry will thrive, and it becomes viable. And that's why we are not looking at carbon capture and storage at this juncture. As far as our policy is concerned, we are just looking at reduction. But if things change, we will definitely be investing into carbon capture. In fact, our university is already partnering with MIT Boston, researching into carbon capture utilization and storage. That would give carbon some value. Otherwise, carbon is now being treated as sewage, as waste. You know, you need to pay to store it. But if you can turn it to some useful thing, then it will be a viable industry. I think I've taken a lot of time. So, yeah, with that, I thank you, Datuk.
Thank you, Mr. Ong. Firstly, thank you, gentlemen. Tremendous strides both your organisations have taken. I think the piece around, I mean, the philosophy that we have at the Exchange is one, to be a catalyst of change, and having champions such as yourselves sharing, and I think that's wonderful. The piece I would like to pick up before I've got a set of questions which we will talk about is, I think there is a real risk in emissions trading schemes. The risk being is you define what is acceptable pollution. And that's why I couldn't help but ask, how do you set the limits and set the targets? Because you need to have an honest broker, as both companies have committed to net zero, as have we, as has the nations, our 2050. We need to be looking at how do we achieve it. And the other slide, if I may, members, friends who are here today, if you look at the message that is implicit in Mr. Ong's conversation is, you have to price it correctly.
Yes.
So there are market forces. And when you look at where our emissions are coming from, power and transportation, are we pricing it correctly? I'm just parking that as something for food for thought for all of us here today. Now, we've talked a great deal about environment, but I think there's something equally as important that Mr. Ong did touch on, Gurdip, is social. And for us at the Exchange, that's something we've also, so we're very keen on environment. In fact, when you, audience, as you look at our booklet, you'll see there's equal emphasis on E, S, and G. Now, many years ago, the focus was very much around G, with the original GLC transformation program. Now, it's always important. In some ways, governance is given. Environment, thanks to COP26, is very front of mind. But I think social is also very important. How we interact with the communities that we're in. Perhaps I'd like to hear from yourselves, and we'll start with Gurdip. I mean, you know, CIMB has a wonderful footprint, reaching many souls. How does CIMB bring forward the social element in the ESG?
No, thanks, Datuk Umar. So I think the way we think about it and what is already started to be done and what we are going to be doing more. So keeping that same concept of minimizing harm and promoting more good as a backdrop of how we think. I think the social lens first on being assisting those that may need that assistance. So as a bank and very much hand in hand with what the government is doing, of course we do what we need to do for inclusion. We do what we need to do to help the let's say the B40 community and that side of the social lens, right? The other side of it is, in fact, I think, and reinforced by Mr. Ong's some of the data, which I guess at some level, you could be lulled into this thing that, hey, Malaysia will achieve net zero quite easily, right? Based on the data that you showed. And in 2004, we were actually already okay, and then now we are trajectorying that way. But I think the potentially bigger risk and area that is less seem to be, having an urgent call to action is actually on the social side, in particular to labor rights and human rights, right? And of course, I'm sure Mr. Ong will have a lot more specific stories to relate to, but as a bank, the way we are doing it is just like how we have environment due diligence that has been already put in place. We're going to up the game on human rights due diligence. So we're putting in place in the next few months our human rights policy. And just to give a bit of a snippet of what that may look like, it's essentially going to require our clients to have a commitment to human rights, to have our clients define a due diligence process on how they assess their state of human rights, and to have in place some form of a grievance mechanism to address that. So that will come in increasingly, and hopefully we can then work with various stakeholders. I think, Bursa, I'm sure, champions that. EPF, not too long back in their sustainability roadmap, also talked a lot about labor rights.
Will CIMB facilitate?
Yeah.
I mean, so say I'm a customer.
Yeah.
I'm sitting there and
Yeah.
my branch manager, my relationship manager, I'm a bit old, so we call them branch managers. My relationship manager comes to me and says, your facility is due for renewal. Please talk to me about these policies you have in place. And I'll go, what policies?
Yeah. No, for sure. So
will you be helping?
long and short, yes. Long and short, yes. Right? So even on the environment side, it's safe to say that in almost every situation where the risk has been high in a particular facility or client situation, we most often and more often than not, we commit to a 12 months or 24 months plan. And that plan then comes with, how can we help, right? So what needs to be put in. On human rights, so we were just discussing in the team, it's not difficult to, take our human rights policy template and of course sanitize it and talk to the client and say, if you don't have one, you can consider adapting from this, right? And so that's one way of helping. So short answer is yes, I think.
So is it binary? If I don't have an appropriate policy, you put me on an exit strategy, or?
No, not on an exit, but we put you on a 2-year or 12 months plus 12 months checkpoint. And
so this is active engagement. So
Yeah.
really, where I was driving from, and we at the Exchange are a great advocate of active engagement, not just binary.
Yeah.
So we're not. So it's not hygiene. You have or you don't have. It is we acknowledge we're on a path.
Yeah.
We put our hand, and we're giving you a hand up.
Yeah.
And we would like to assist you and guide you. And this is what the PLCT is about,
Yeah.
bringing ourselves together to share ideas about bringing Malaysian corporates, and not just PLCs, I might add. I mean, the handbooks themselves are framed in such a way that it works for SMEs as well.
Yeah.
And they're all free.
Correct.
Mr. Ong.
Yeah, if I may, we are learning, all of us are learning. Sunway, myself, my colleagues, we are also struggling to try to make sense of everything. But, for us, we see ESG more as an internal reflection. It's like a mirror reflecting on where we stand in a changing world. As I said, the environment is changing, the social demands in terms of human rights, in terms of equality, in terms of being treated with dignity. These demands are growing. And ESG is a very good mirror for us to reflect where we stand, how well prepared are we in the face of these inevitable challenges that's coming upon us. And so it is in our own interest to pay attention to all this. As far as the S component is concerned, we are focusing more on OSH, occupational safety and health, because our employees must feel safe. It must be very comfortable. That would help in attracting and retaining talents. The other aspect is that you see, that's the internal part, dealing with our people. The other part of the S is the external part, dealing with needs that are out there. ESG is more looking inwards and seeing what are the social needs within your group so that it can continue to prosper in the changing circumstances. Then you have to look at the community out there. That's where CSR comes in. CSR used to be the buzzword, but today, it is not so much talk about out there. So it's a two-pronged approach that we have adopted. I think in Sunway we have established more than 30 safety communities, occupational health and safety committees all across the country. And we are starting to conduct audits. Actually, if you were to look into the Malaysian law, the OSH Act, there are a lot of requirements there. It's just that it's quite tough and quite comprehensive. Actually, it's very good. It's just that enforcement have not picked up yet. But if enforcement were to come in, a lot of us might be in breach of the OSH Act.
Well, your executive chairman and myself and Dr. Rahman, we're the principal officers under OSHA. I take it very seriously.
Yes. So that's one area that I think as a corporation, as companies, we should look into very carefully because it's going to affect our operations.
No, but that teases out a very interesting point. If I just taking it forward, if I may, I'm not suggesting in any way, Gurdip, that CIMB is homogeneous, but you have 30 different OSHA committees, you have a very diverse group, education, manufacturing, property, and you've introduced a carbon tax effectively.
Yep.
Malaysians are very different.
Yeah.
How do you socialise it? How do you communicate it? How did Sunway make it work? Of course, one assumes if Tan Sri Jeffrey wants it, it happens. So there's that piece, if I may, with a wry smile on my face.
Yeah.
But you've got to communicate if it's not accepted.
Yes. Yeah, you're very right. Some are persuaded. I don't know. I mean, after hearing what I said, maybe some are persuaded that we need to do something. So they would voluntarily do it. Some you need a little bit of compelling. That's where regulatory bodies like yourself comes in. Because when you say you need to comply, all the companies understand the language that they need to comply. So that would help in moving the inertia a little bit. But what I want to say is that it is only helpful, to move inertia in these regards. That's where external pressure comes in. That's just to get it moving. But for it to be sustainable, it has to be internalized. It has to be a value system. Then it will continue to be sustainable. We are very glad and we are very happy. In fact, young talents are attracted to Sunway because they can see the philosophy, they can see the values in Sunway, in Tan Sri Jeffrey Chia. He is a man who says, it should not be a profit at all costs or any cost, at all costs. We have been offered casino license, which he has rejected because you cannot, on one hand, educate young people to be good citizens through universities and then offer them vices and things like that as well. So I think that has been inculcated into the culture and the value system of Sunway, and that makes it sustainable. And hopefully, it attracts good talents and helps us retain talents. And that is also why a lot of people are very committed to ESG, to the SDGs. So we need a little bit of carrot and stick, and hopefully for the longer run, we inculcate it as part of the DNA of the group to make it sustainable.
Thank you, Mr. Ong.
Yeah.
Congratulations on the journey. If I may, moving on for that conversation, CIMB's been TCFD compliant since 2021. You're beginning to reach out to your customers. If you could share with the audience a little bit of that journey and what it's going to mean as you cascade and continue to report.
Yeah, sure. So that TCFD is, of course, as Mr. Ong referred to, we are learning many things and learning very fast on many things. And fortunately or unfortunately, everyone else also is learning. And so you don't have, ready answers when you get stuck, right? But just specifically on TCFD, so TCFD has 4 sort of buckets of 4 components: strategy, governance, risk, and matrix and measuring, right? So I think the strategy and governance is a bit more straightforward. So anyone who wants to go down that path, I think Mr. Google can lead you to enough samples and examples of what you need to do, so that's not too challenging. I think on the risk side and assessing the risk of your assets and your portfolio, that gets into slightly uncharted territories for many people, right? And so in our case is sort of understanding the components of how to break it down. So I'm sure you would have heard, some of you would have heard, the concept of transition risk, the concept of physical risk. So if you look at, the assets that you have, what is exposed to what. And as I mentioned earlier in our net zero sort of context, for us, our scope 3 is just so complex because our scope 3 is all of you, essentially, right?
That's the tricky bit.
Yeah, and
Are you going to help me calculate my scope 3?
So yeah, so we have started, and so again, there are groups and bodies you can work with, right? So PCAF, someone that we are working with in our pilot to assess and baseline our current state, and then do the scenarios and look at it sector. So what we've done is we've looked at it sector by sector.
Are banks working together, Gurdip, on this? Because you all have the same challenge.
Yeah.
I mean, because I think there's a piece to build capacity and capability through the whole green economy.
Yeah. So the short answer is there's a lot of conversations with banks. And of course, your team is part of this JC3 conversation, which is a good platform where many things are being sort of triggered as issues that we can collectively try and find solutions. And in fact, in those forums, in fact, in the last recent JC3 meeting, that same thing that you mentioned was brought up, which is everyone is hoping for, a third party of some form to be mandated and say, I'm going to be the register, I'm going to be the one that will house and collate all this data, and Bank Negara, SC, and everyone says, okay, use this. That makes potentially life easier for a lot of people, but
how do you fund it?
Yeah, so then you get into the other complexities about who is the natural owner and starter of that. I picked up this morning, although I must admit I don't have the full color on that, but I picked up this morning at the Khazanah had an event this morning as well on sustainability. There was some mention that the government was looking at a form of a register of some form.
Yeah.
So yeah, maybe that will help and get everyone to come together and apply consistent standards to disclose. But yeah, so TCFD, if it's any saving grace, is banks in Europe, UK, and various parts of the world are not necessarily very far ahead in having solved it.
I think that's true. I think it's a very interesting conversation for us that shape policy and act as catalysts and also lead, is as we pursue our journey, what role do we play? Because I think, Sunway, Mr. Ong, you've taken great strides in greening your supply chain. And this is one of the things we talk about the exchange, is as we green our supply chains, we need data sets. Do we help and support the collection of that data, or do we allow members of our supply chain to not muddle through, but to fund it? Yeah. And so anyway, again, it's something I'm posing to the audience, and it's food for thought. Now, I just want to evolve the conversation a little bit. So at Sunway, you pollute, you get charged, and your bonus pool gets cut. Yep. Big nod from Mr. Ong. Now, CIMB has adopted MCCG 2021, best practice. Senior members of the team have ESG KPIs. Bonus pool gets cut, balance scorecard. How share with us. Give us some guidance. Give us some guidance.
No, sure.
How we would tackle it. We've got one solution, which is actually quite complicated because you have to calculate emissions and allowable emissions and work backwards. Yeah. But it's quite interesting. What would be another path? Good. No, so you have a different path.
Yeah, no, I'll definitely come back and talk about the bonus cut in a minute. As you know, I also wear the HR hat, so that's very natural conversation to be having on bonuses. No, so firstly, so what we did was we integrate sustainability as part of what we call the corporate scorecard, and the key scorecards that drive, if you like, drives performance assessment, which then drives bonus considerations, right? So we have 100 collective scorecards, and that's the way the organization is kind of, if you like, clustered. Countries, divisions, business units. So we have 100 scorecards, and all these 100 scorecards have sustainability as part of that scorecard. Okay, so that's one way. So if you think about it, there's an indirect link to bonus. Okay, what Mr. Ong described was very interesting, which is specifically to your department or division's emission or usage of energy, specifically, right? Energy. So interestingly, we've piloted also the internal carbon pricing, but what we have not done is translate that to a direct bonus cut if you go above. So something we will keep in mind. Maybe we can think about that. But yeah, so long and short, the mainstay of, if you like, the linkage between sustainability, activity, performance, and hitting or missing targets is linked to the collective scorecards, which then link to the bonus pool for that function and individuals. Yeah.
No, I mean, both work, both are interesting.
Yeah.
I do like the idea of calculating, and it's got my mind thinking, and my team is probably going, oh, this is not a good thing. Now, that being said, we will be taking questions, but I think that the most interesting piece as we go through this journey is one of the themes we've seen as we embark on sustainability and ESG is taxonomy, common language, greenwashing. And as you know, at the exchange, we're going through a public consultation piece. We will be mandating, because we've seen the shift. We at the exchange are advocating active engagement by investors and retail and institutional, as well as customers, stakeholders of PLCs, to disclose properly, make informed decisions, and engage where people don't see things that that are not appropriate. Yeah. But it's a common language has become very important. That's why JC3 is important for us, as well as mandated disclosure. Now, I've been asking questions and having a little bit of fun with my two guests on the stage. Now, I encourage the audience, please do ask questions. There are microphones available. And I'm also game to take questions should you have some for the exchange. Of course, I have my team here to answer the questions, so I'm cheating a little bit. Go, Raj.
Thank you, Raj here. And thank you to the panelists, wonderful perspectives. I guess if we start thinking about it, there's always in an organization this small group of people who are so passionate about ESG, just like the two gentlemen here. But I think you've made it very clear that ESG is a responsibility of all. If not, we're not going to realize that vision. You alluded to some challenges, but what are from the panelist perspective, what are some of the challenges you face in mobilizing the organization to embrace your ESG vision? And what are some of the initiatives we have put in place to get people to come along so no one's left behind? Thank you.
If I can, Raj, I'll have, gentlemen, if you don't mind. I'm not going to talk about Bursa per se, and Bursa. I'm going to talk about my 950 PLCs, who are a very key part of who and what we do. Now, clearly, two PLCs on board, fully committed, helping us make the change. FTSE for Good had 19 new emissions net announced yesterday. So that puts it, we're probably shy around about 89 from memory. I haven't done the math today. We have 950 PLCs. We have a lot of work to do. Why the discrepancy? Is ESG a hygiene factor? Is it an investment or is it a cost? So at the exchange, it is our view that it is future-proofing your business. It's not a cost. The analogy I'd make for a manufacturing entity is you buy a machine to produce something. ESG is exactly the same investment. You are future-proofing your business. Now, of course, I'm communicating this because this is the carrot. Make your business future-proof. We're fighting for business every day. Malaysia is a trading nation. Europe is the third largest trading partner and is talking about a carbon equalization tax. Now, of course, it's rather opaque at the moment, it's going to be scaled in over a decade, but effectively what it means is we will become less cost competitive if we are emitting more than what is allowable in a European context. Now, much discussion about what will happen at WTO, is it a non-tariff barrier, etc., but I think it is a real call to action. As we've seen, some of our exports have been held at ports. Again, a call to action. Because what we want to do is take the opportunity to use green as the pivot for Malaysia to a high-income country. Now, this is a real challenge. We're a developing nation. And if we think back to Mr. Ong's graph on emissions, we flipped and we went over 2004, 2005. That's because we have a higher standard of living. Those large TV screens our children are playing PS5 or PS4 on use a lot of energy. Air conditioning uses a lot of energy. Our lifestyle uses a lot of energy. And this is what we aspire to. And so it's going to become necessary for us to be more efficient and understand what we are doing to our environment as we move to net zero 2050. So I think that the key thing is to start that conversation, understand the pivot to green, and not, of course, I think some will say that mandatory disclosure is the stick. It is not. It's about talking a common language, creating a need, creating an awareness. That awareness will then allow us to drive our PLCs to be where they need to be, which is bearing in mind the PLCs interact with SMEs, so intermediate goods become finished goods. We're looking at the whole supply chain. Our aspiration is to have a green supply chain for Malaysia and actually displace existing supply chains. COVID has provided the opportunity where we're going to see supply chains being disaggregated. They will no longer be concentrated. It will happen over a period of time. We need to take that advantage. Now, that's what we look at, but taking that question, Raj, gentlemen, for your own wargas.
No, sure. No, I think it's a fantastic one, and one way to think about it is in every organization you can probably break down, folks to a few subgroups, right? So in the area of sustainability, so first, when you first start talking a lot about it in the organization, the average person in the organization will say, oh, this is just another new initiative, and in 6 months' time we'll be talking about something else, or 12 months' time, So you got people who think it's a transitionary thing, and then later it becomes real. So long and short is, I think the messaging of why we are doing it is very important, because that cannot be a transitionary conversation. So I think when it came to sustainability, we did spend a bit of time, and like I said, every organization you got all sorts of groups of people, right? So to your busy banker who's trying to sell the next loan or generate the next deal or whatever, it's like, why are we talking about this? I'm talking about 3-4 years ago. But today, that same group of individuals in the bank are fully sort of plugged in, right? And the reason why they've got plugged in is, one is they've realized that this is real, as in there's a real sort of case for it. Two, they know that the organization top down is serious with it and behind it. And three, which is I think the tipping point, they actually see an opportunity to make money. And so once you get to that point, then, you get larger numbers to come along, right? Because on the other end of the spectrum, you always get people who have a natural bias to socially doing the right thing, especially younger folks and all of that. So for them, it's easy sell. You don't even need to sell. It's there. But it is, your core business performers who are every day so busy doing what they are doing to generate the profits for the company, to tell them that, hey, you need to start thinking about this because of X, because of Y, because of Z. That takes a lot of persistence and continuation, right? So yeah, maybe I'll stop there, but happy to sort of go deeper if people want to chat more on that.
If I may, I think it's a very good and relevant question. I forgot about it. Actually, future-proofing your business is one. It's a defensive thing, how we adapt and remain resilient to the changes. But the other side, I think the profit center managers would love to hear if you tell them how, by practicing sustainability, you could add to your bottom line. I think that's what they like to hear. So it is not mutually exclusive. We have to tell them that, look, if you can save 4% in terms of energy utilization, for the whole group, it's about 4 to 5 million ringgit savings. It's going to the bottom line. So it's not, contradictory to the P&L requirements. Water security, for example, some of these are quite abstract. People can't see the value, but it is there. If you come to Sunway City, our lakes receive about 2 million cubic meter of rainwater because it is under the ground, the lakes. 2 million cubic meter of rainwater, that's a lot. Don't talk about rainwater harvesting from the roof. Those are so quite messy. But we already have a huge lake, 2 million cubic, and we treat the water. And in Malaysia, we still have water cuts every now and then, even though we are blessed with a lot of rain because of pollution, because of the old age of the pipes and things like that. But if you are in Sunway City, it is secure, because we produce our own water. And how much would a tenant and operator pay in terms of premium for water security, because there's no disruption. Other people cannot run, your hotel can still run. You come to Sunway Hotel when there's a water cut, no problem. So these are sometimes intangible, abstract, you can't see, but you have to communicate to your people by doing the right thing, doing it well. In the longer run, you will win. I think in ESG, they say who cares win in the longer run. Care about the environment, care about your people, care about your integrity and governance, and in the long run, it will bear fruits. We have to carry that positive message as well, instead of just the defensive part. Thank you.
Thank you, Song. Thanks, Gurdip.
Overall, globally, I think there has been a lot of things that are moving on. So the geopolitical developments, the Russia-Ukraine war, the growing concern by the governments and industries of inflation and steep rise of energy cost has curtailed some of the developments that we were hoping for. And in fact, EU just recently, I think this morning or late yesterday, depending, has also looked at the proposed bill that was put forward on carbon tax, and that's been rejected. So that's been a huge blow. What are your thoughts on looking forward? Where is this moving to? And just general sense, given there's so many things going on, do you feel that the climate change agenda will again take knock on, or will be accelerated? What are just some thoughts on that?
In broad terms, clearly, demand pull inflation, issues around energy, Southeast Asia has been somewhat blessed. We have a warmer climate. Malaysia's had a fairly benign inflation rate compared to the world. One of the reasons is, well, one, of course, we have implicit subsidies on petrol, which is a large portion. We don't use gas for heating, etc. And funnily enough, we eat a lot of rice, which does make a big difference. So rice, harga beras dan naik, but not the way harga wheat has gone up. Now, where does that sit? Well, clearly there's been this conversation about coal coming back on to support energy needs. Now, I think short term, there's a hit. Long term, it's a call to action. Now, what does that mean? If we cast our minds back to the initial energy shocks of the oil price hikes by OPEC many, many years ago, I was a young lad. I dare say you may not have been born yet. We had inflation, we had recession, all driven by the price of energy going up. That's the environment today. That's the concern for world markets, if I may. Impact of inflation, what's going to happen to growth? Are we in for a soft landing? Where does that sit? But the long-term consequences, we actually found using an analogy, we found new oil supplies, we found new technology, we moved on. Now, one of the themes of today is you have to price it right. So, yes, there's been a shock around energy. Yes, today there's a conversation. Yes, there is a short-term setback. I, myself, not speaking for Bursa, but my thought process is that it will be a call to action and encourage development of new technologies, green hydrogen, renewables, that need the right price point to make them work. Carbon sequestration, it all becomes more real because we're operating in a higher price environment. Actually, cheap energy which is carbon intensive makes it much harder to argue for that pivot to green. So if I may, the high cost of energy today, yes, there will be an impact to world growth. Yes, in real terms, we are suffering, but that impact to the, if you like, the greening of the world is actually short-term impact. Longer term, we'll see the pivot to green because the price, we can sustain a larger price for new technologies. So I'm looking at a very macro, medium-term sense, not the first 12, 24 months. If you'd like to add, gentlemen, they're just my thoughts.
Yeah, I'm not qualified to talk about it, but maybe just one observation. You know, when the European countries rejected gas from Australia and prefer to buy oil as the substitute for gas, which is cleaner, much cleaner than oil, I think it is a bit of a setback for the climate change agenda. You know, but this is always the struggle, livelihood, like we experienced in the pandemic, where to find the right balance. But it's really a balancing act, and hopefully it's just a short-term setback.
Yep.
There.
Hi. Can you hear me? Yeah. So, Mr. Umar, your point about, you know, as we try to get to net zero, scope 1, 2, and 3, and like Gurdip said, 3 is like 700x of 1 and 2. So I picked up your point about if we can create some common metrics, because, you know, we could have a same client as Maybank and somebody else's has. So I think that's quite interesting. The second thing, Mr. Ong's, this reduction, the carbon tax from bonus, I think is a very compelling one. I was just thinking that, does it come very negatively, you only deduct? Or should there be a positive spin, that if you reduce fast enough, you get positive?
Yeah.
Just a thought. Thank you.
Yes. I mean, if they can reduce fast enough, you know, we are saving on the energy cost. Like I said, 4% reduction is 4 million to the group. We can always also offer the carrot, but we are starting with a cost just to mimic carbon tax and emission trading, you know. Emission trading you can actually sell, so that's a carrot as well. But just to mimic a little bit the languages of a carbon tax, so there's a price to it, you know. But it can always also be an incentive. Yeah.
I mean, the conversation, of course, is saying investment, cost, reducing costs. It goes to the bottom line. I think it's also important to think new markets, new top line, displacing your competitor. Because, you know, if Malaysia can reposition itself as a green supplier, as a country that supports initiatives, capacity building, and providing services, green services to the balance of ASEAN, we'll pivot and we'll have a new top line that other people don't have. And so we have the cost piece, we have maintaining our footprint or maintaining the business we have, but we're a little bit more aspirational. We want to get someone else's business. We want our unfair share of growth. That should be what we're targeting through adopting ESG practices.
Let's take that as the last question for the day.
Thank you.
Right. Datuk Umar, thank you for moderating the session, and to both our panelists, Mr. Gurdip Singh and Mr. Ong Pang Yen, thank you for the insights as to how both your companies have consciously integrated the ESG framework and focus into your respective organizations' culture. Now, as a token of appreciation to both our panelists, we'd like to first invite Datuk Umar to present a memento to Mr. Gurdip Singh Sidhu. And now, a memento to Mr. Ong Pang Yen. Gentlemen, we'll now take a much welcomed photo opportunity together. Don't forget to pose and smile your brightest. Thank you, gentlemen. You may now return to your seats. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, this now concludes the formal presentations and the discourse portion of our event. Our esteemed members of the media, if you could all please proceed to the media room located immediately behind me. Datuk Omar Swift and Encik Julian Hashim will be happy to answer any questions that you have on the guidebook 2 on ESG or the PLCT program in general. For our other honored guests, we'd like to invite you all to please reconnect and network with like-minded individuals and to continue your conversations over some light refreshments in the lobby foyer just outside this listing gallery. Our ushers will guide you there. And on behalf of Bursa Malaysia, we thank you for your time in joining us for this meaningful event. We hope that you have indeed found this event informative and beneficial. Our fervent hope is that each and every one of us in the audience today, regardless of the function and level, will help to play our roles towards driving stronger embodiment of sustainability and achievement of performance within our organizations. With this, wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Wassalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you and have a pleasant weekend ahead. Stay safe. Salam sejahtera.